Hello, this is Louise post-recording the episode you're about to watch. There is a period of time where my camera freaked out and I turned into a green Hulk-looking creature. So I apologize for that. I'm going to try to get a different camera so that doesn't happen in the future. But when you see that, don't let it distract you too much. You can still hear what I'm saying. Everything else is basically working. So I decided not to reshoot it. But I wanted to let you know you can expect me to turn into the Hulk for a short period in this, and I'm going to ask your forgiveness for me still learning how technology works and why things randomly turn green. So I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to our last episode here in season 1. We've been exploring the topic, am I the toxic one? And this week we're going to talk about what you can do to determine once and for all if you are the toxic one. So before we dive into it, for those of you who are new, just found the channel, welcome. My name is Louise. I'm the founder and CEO of Empowerment Through Thought. We are a philosophical coaching business dedicated to helping those navigating toxic relationships overcome brain fog and build the life that they deserve. It's important to know that I'm not a mental health professional, so take my ideas and advice accordingly. I have been trained as a philosopher, so my main bag is reasoning and thinking, not emotions and feeling. So last week we covered, what does it mean if you are seriously considering that you are the toxic one? Well, if you're asking this question seriously, remember, you're being open to the idea that you are causing some of the problems in your life. Toxic people cannot usually tolerate the idea that they're part of the problem. So if you're considering this question and being open to the fact that you are playing a role in these problems, that's some evidence that you're not a toxic person. Now, remember last week we talked about there are ways toxic people ask this question. So it's not like a guarantee. If you are asking this question, you're automatically not toxic. It's not quite that simple. So if you need a refresher on that, any of that sounds confusing to you, go ahead and check out last week's episode. So here's our roadmap, what we've been doing here in season 1. We started off covering the difference between being a toxic person and engaging in toxic behavior. We asked the question, what are we really asking? What are we really wondering about if we are the toxic ones? And last week we covered what it means if you're seriously considering this question. And today we're going to wrap it up by saying what you can do to determine once and for all if you are the toxic one. So like last time, this presentation is going to have 3 different sections. We're going to have a theory section where we're going to cover kind of the big ideas behind answering this question. Then we're going to do some real world examples to help make all of that more concrete. And then I'm going to leave you with some action items, some things you can do to start developing your own answers to these questions. So let's jump into the theory. Now, we need to think a little bit about what does it take to be a toxic person. Remember, week 1, we explored the differences between sometimes engaging in toxic behavior and being a toxic person. 2 different things. Now, in this episode, we're going to be focused on your status as a toxic person. Toxic people engage in so much toxic behavior that they often don't even notice that they're doing it anymore. The problematic behaviors these folks engage in often seriously undermines their quality of life and the relationships they have with others. Now, remember, I use the word toxic person a little bit more specifically than some people. So I use it as a blanket term for folks who have personality disorders. So, right, the question we're looking for today, am I the toxic one? We can reframe that question when we're focused on toxic people in particular as, do I have a personality disorder? Now, the way folks are determined to have any kind of mental health problems today is through the criteria laid out in the DSM. This is a famous book in psychology. You're likely to have heard it if you've existed in this space very much. It is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So that's the way today, especially in the United States. I can't speak to all countries, but at least in the United States, if you're going to have a mental health problem, especially the more serious ones, the main way that's going to be determined is by someone using the DSM to help figure out which particular problem you have based on your symptoms. Now, the DSM is a book that's the culmination of several generations worth of experts in mental health. Within the pages of the DSM, you generally find lists of all the currently recognized mental health disorders and the symptoms of these disorders. So there's a lot of kind of criteria for each thing. So if you have depression, here are the symptoms of that. And usually it's organized where any given person might not present with all of the criteria that's listed, but they're going to present with at least 3, 4, whatever of that list. So who can use the DSM? Well, anyone can read it. It's available for the public. It's a bit expensive if you're going to buy it, but your library might have it. You can find excerpts from it on places as approachable as Wikipedia. We can all read it, but the only folks that are qualified to use that criteria laid out in the DSM are mental health professionals. That is part of the core training of mental health professionals. Now remember, I'm not a mental health professional. I have some training in psychology as an undergraduate. I did some of that, but I am not a mental health professional. I just know from my experience and working with mental health professionals that they are trained to use the DSM. That's part of the core thing they do. Now, one of the things this training involves is separating out what typical human behavior is, right? What people who are just kind of going through the normal experiences that human beings undergo, and the kinds of behaviors that characterize mental health disorders, right? There's a line that psychologists draw between kind of ordinary, like you're just living your life, that's just what it's like to be a human, and behaviors that rise to the level of a mental health disorder. That can be very difficult to sort out. So that's why mental health professionals spend a lot of time and energy training to really get a good sense of how those behaviors fall on the spectrum of human beings. As a result, the only folks qualified to officially diagnose mental health disorders, including personality disorders, are those mental health professionals. So if you want to know if you have a personality disorder, you're going to need to turn to the expertise of mental health professionals. Right, I'm not that kind of person. I can't tell you if you have a personality disorder. I have some personal experience with folks who do have personality disorders, so I might have some feelings. I might have some guesses. You know, I have my own brains and my own thoughts, and I can go read the DSM and say like, it feels about right to me, but I can never officially diagnose anyone. Right. And if there was ever going to be a real concrete, we can rely on this kind of diagnosis, it's going to have to come from folks who have dedicated their whole careers to being able to sort out the differences between ordinary human behavior and behavior at the level of a mental disorder. Now, mental health professionals come in a lot of different varieties, right? Some of the methods these kind of folks use is behaviorism, some of psychotherapy. There's like a huge range of these kind of methodologies. So it's not that all mental health professionals are trained in exactly the same way, but all mental health professionals are trained to use the DSM as a guide. This is like a unified thing in the mental health field. Now, if this is new stuff for you, I want to give you a little bit of background because there's a lot of like different names for mental health professionals and it can get kind of confusing. So I want to give you a little bit of insight into what some of those major terms are and some of the training of those folks. And that's going to help us later on when we're talking about, kind of the concrete things you can do to help answer this question for yourself once and for all. Now, psychologists, these are folks who hold a PhD and are licensed by each state's government. At least that's how it works in the United States. Your state government will give a license based on examinations and different qualifications for someone to call themselves a psychologist. Now, psychiatrists they're like psychologists, they have similar training, but they are also licensed medical doctors. So psychiatrists are the people you go to if you need any kind of medication in order to help navigate your mental health issues. Now, there's a bunch of words for this other category: counselors, clinicians, therapists. Sometimes people with PhDs call themselves therapists. There's a whole array of things, of terms here. But usually this category is for folks who at least hold a master's degree. So that's a 2-year degree in the United States. PhDs are typically 5-year degrees. Sometimes they can take as much as 10 years to complete. So these counselors, clinicians, therapists, they have that 2 years degree, that master's degree. They are also usually licensed by the state government in the United States. And then we have this other term called a clinical social worker. These folks have a master's degree in a field called social work. So they're the specific kind of 2-year training. And they are also trained, like all of these other folks, to evaluate different people's mental health and use specific therapeutic techniques to help folks navigate that. So all of these people are trained in looking at the DSM and helping people figure out, okay, what kind of situation are you facing with your mental health? So that's just some terminology to kind of help us as we move forward. I'm just going to use this blanket term, mental health professional. I'm not going to get into the weeds about psychologists, psychiatrists. In general, the rule is if you're looking to work with a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it's going to be more expensive than if you're working with people who have a master's degree. This does not always hold, but usually the more training the person has, the more expensive the bill. So that's just a little bit of background for us. So, okay, this might not be a shock at this point, but if you really want to know if you have a personality disorder, you're going to need to consult a mental health professional. It can be really tempting to self-evaluate using the DSM, right? We can go look and read the things and we can be like, you know, I'm a human. I've seen a lot of other humans. Like, I can tell what's going on. And you're right, you do have some good insight into what it's like to be a human because of your life experiences. But there's a reason people dedicate so much time and have so much formal training in trying to sort out the nuances of, you know, disorders versus just ordinary human behavior. There really is reason for this expertise to exist. So if you really want to know, you want an accurate understanding of whether you are facing a particular kind of mental health issue, you really do need to go to one of the experts. Now, it's important to know that even trained mental health professionals do not self-diagnose using the DSM. So these are people who have all of that training. The general practice is not to turn around and say like, okay, well, I can see I have this problem and I have that problem, right? There's this idea that if you're going to be fairly evaluated, if you're going to get a really good, strong answer to this question, you really need a third-party perspective to take a look at your specific situation. Right? It can be easy for us to lose perspective on some of our behaviors. It can be easy for us to think something's like a huge deal when it turns out we had big feelings, but it wasn't actually a huge deal. All of those issues with our perception, our ability to think of and reflect on our own behaviors can really make it difficult to self-diagnose. So even these folks that have years and years of training doing this, they don't self-diagnose. So that's even more evidence that we shouldn't rely on self-diagnosis in order to determine something as serious as whether we have a personality disorder. Okay, so here's an interesting epistemological question. So epistemology, excuse me, is a field in philosophy where we ask questions about like, how do we know stuff? So here we might be wondering like, how do we know if the mental health provider makes the right diagnosis? Right? We can think of examples maybe in our own lives where we've gone to a doctor and the doctor said, oh, this is the problem. And it turns out the doctor was wrong. Or, you know, maybe we have family members who have struggled to get things diagnosed by doctors because, you know, there are differences in opinions or methodologies or expertise among doctors. So let me get a drink of water. It is dry today. So now the typical advice when we go to a doctor, right, is to take their opinion. You want to take it seriously. You want to check it yourself. You might not have the expertise that like a mental health professional or another kind of doctor has, but you want to make sure that the things they're telling you resonates with you. Like it seems like a plausible diagnosis given everything that you know. Another thing you want to do is kind of strengthen the evidence that this doctor is right. And the typical way we suggest that is to get a second opinion, right? You can go to another doctor, you go to another mental health professional and have the same kind of conversation and see what they say about it. This is the same space, right? When we go to a doctor, we get a diagnosis. If it's really important to us, if we're really concerned about it, in some cases, if it's a matter of life and death, we want to make sure that's the right diagnosis. So whether you're seeking answers about your chronic illness or you're seeking answers about a mental health issue, this is a good way to handle this epistemological issue of like, how do I know that this person's right? You go to another expert and see if that expert agrees or disagrees with the first diagnosis. If you visit a few doctors and they all produce the same diagnosis, you have much stronger evidence that this is the right diagnosis. Or if you have a bunch of experts all saying like, yeah, this is the right thing, that makes it much more likely that it is the right thing. You aren't catching the differences in training, methodology, that stuff. So you want to know whether you have a personality disorder. You really want to know this. You want to settle the issue once and for all. You just want to be done with this. Well, here's the game plan. You're going to need to be evaluated by at least 2 mental health professionals, right? If you just do one, you might be catching some particular thing about that doctor, and you really want to have confidence on such a serious question that you aren't just hearing the view of one person, but you're getting consensus among experts. You can be direct with your doctors as you work with them and say you suspect that you have a personality disorder and you're looking for answers. Not every doctor is going to probably want to work with you if that is your perspective. Some methodologies are more friendly to this question than others. I would suggest, if this is your goal, to be upfront with your doctor and say, this is what I'm here for, this is what I want to understand, and see what the doctor says if they're willing to work with you on that basis. Once you have the opinions of at least 2 doctors in hand, you can reasonably settle whether your current mental health status meets the DSM criteria for a personality disorder. If it turns out that the doctors confirm that you have this personality disorder, then you have found your answer to the question, am I the toxic one? You also now have a relationship with at least 2 different mental health professionals who can provide you support on your mental health journey. Right? If you are one of those individuals that has a personality disorder, your quality of life is most likely going to increase if you can find quality mental health professionals to help you on your journey. Now, if it turns out that these doctors agree that you do not have a personality disorder, then you also have your answer to the question, right? Toxic people, as far as I use the term, are people who have personality disorders. So if you go to the doctor and they say you don't have a personality disorder, you are not a toxic person. Of course, you might still engage occasionally in toxic behaviors. You might still have a lot of emotional work that you need to do in order to live the kind of life that you want to, right? It's not a free pass. Just because you're not a toxic person doesn't mean you don't have to reflect, you don't have to work on yourself. But it just means that you're not at the level of a personality disorder. So the kind of support you need, the kind of guidance you can get from folks like me who are coaches, we can help guide you. Whereas somebody with a personality disorder, like, we might not be qualified to guide you because you need a stronger support than we can offer. And also, if it turns out you don't have a personality disorder, at the very least, you just develop 2 relationships with different doctors who can help provide you support on the journey that you do need to take, even if it's not the journey of somebody with a personality disorder. Now, okay, so this seems nice and tidy, but there's still lots of questions to ask here. We might wonder some about the criteria in the DSM. We might want to know more about, like, well, how did the mental health professionals figure out, like, what behaviors count as a personality disorder and which ones don't? Right? We can tell that from all of this is the DSM is very powerful here, right? Like at the end of the day, the DSM is kind of the thing that determines whether you do or do not have any particular mental health condition. And that's a lot of power for one book to have. And the DSM has not been a document that has, never come under scrutiny or has never had problems. At one point in time, homosexuality was considered a mental health disorder. It was listed in the DSM as a problem for people to have. Today, we don't typically think that. We think that homosexuality is just another way that human beings exist. The most pushback on homosexuality no longer comes from the mental health community. It comes more from people who have religious commitments. So, the DSM is not always perfect. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. We might wonder about that. We might also wonder about the ethical implications. So someone needing to visit 2 doctors to get a diagnosis when mental health services are notoriously expensive, right? So I made this recommendation that you see at least 2, and that's because, while there is a lot of standardization within the mental health field, it is not completely unified in its values or methodologies. So for that reason, I think you really do need to go to more than 1, but that's going to be more expensive. That might make getting the kind of diagnoses that people really need to help improve their lives even more difficult for the folks who maybe need it the most. There's folks who are at a lower socioeconomic status or who are from historically oppressed groups. Okay, so I want to point those out. Those are things I worry about, but we just leave that for now. Whether we think that the system is good or bad or not, you live in the world right now where this system exists. If you want to, you can put energy in towards trying to get it to change. But whether you do that or not, you still exist in the system. And if you want the answer to this question today, these are the kinds of things we're going to need to do. So if you want to remember some of this stuff, I want to remind you that in addition to this YouTube, over this week, a series of blog posts will be going live over on my website. Now, if you don't want to check in on my website every day, which I totally understand, you can get the digest version of those sent to your inbox if you just sign up for our email list. So you can find all of that over on my website. It's www.empowermentthroughthought.com. It'll be linked in the description box below. And the posts going up there are going to provide kind of notes and a summary of all the different parts of this YouTube. It also includes some kind of bonus content. So be sure to check that stuff out. Okay, let's move into the real world examples. So this is going to be a little bit different than the past weeks. We're going to focus just on a woman named Shannon. So let's say Shannon, this is a person I've created like last time. She's a fictional character, but I've created her based on my own experiences and the experiences of the folks I've worked with. She's a 35-year-old elementary school teacher. Okay. Now, Shannon has been having a lot of tension in her personal life. She keeps trying to become closer with folks, but things always seem to go wrong. She's beginning to wonder if the reason things keep going south might be because something is wrong with her. Okay, so what do we do when we have a problem in the world? As I'm recording this, it's 2020. As you're watching this, it's 2021. Here in this era, when we have a problem, we turn to the internet. The internet has all the answers, right? Well, Shannon really wants to find the answer to this. She wants to know. And she can't seem to find the peace and fulfillment that she really longs for in her life. So she goes to the normal places that she occupies on the internet. She watches some YouTube. She goes over to Instagram. She tries to find some answers to why this is happening to her. Now, in her research, she discovers that some of her problems line up with the way folks discuss toxic people. And she begins to wonder if she might be a toxic person. Now, Shannon begins to see that folks on the internet often associate toxicity with mental health problems. So maybe Shannon caught wind of my, this is a personality disorder thing. Now, she hasn't paid much attention to mental health issues in her life. In college, she was experiencing a lot of test anxiety. So she went to the university health services that she had available. That's the only real interaction she's ever had with thinking about and working on mental health explicitly. She decides it's time to get more in touch with her own mental health. So she tries some popular solutions, some things that influencers are often recommending on Instagram and the like. She reads a million posts, she watches a bunch of videos about how to improve your mental health, and she decides to try a few things. She starts meditating, she starts journaling once a week, and she strives really hard to take time to read and do some of her favorite activities on the regular basis. But these efforts don't seem to be helping resolve the problems in her personal life. This gives her even more reason to think she might be the problem. So she went to the internet, she found some of the ways people deal with some of this stuff as best as she can figure out. She's trying really hard, but they don't seem to be helping the main part of the problem. And now she's even more worried, like, well, if this is helping everybody else and it's not helping me, maybe something's going on with me. So Shannon decides to seek answers. She wants to really solve this question of, is she the toxic person? She doesn't want to leave such an important question up to random internet articles or her best guesses based on browsing on Wikipedia. Shannon recognizes that being a toxic person means having a serious mental health problem. So she decides to approach a mental health professional. So Shannon's going to get herself evaluated. She searches a while to find a mental health professional, and she finds one who is open to exploring her concerns about being a toxic person. Once they've worked together for a while, Shannon asks the doctor what her formal diagnosis is. You have a right as a patient to ask a doctor that question. It's not the case that all mental health providers will be really forthcoming in telling you about your official diagnosis, which, as somebody who's not a mental health professional, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that practice. I think that actually directly caused me harm, especially with my mother. But okay, side note, as a patient, you can always ask directly, what is the diagnosis? And it's gonna, exactly how that conversation is gonna go is gonna depend somewhat on the mental health professional you're working with. That's why I recommended at the beginning that you are very upfront that this is what you are interested in working on. This is what you really want to know in working with this expert. So much to her surprise, the doctor tells her that she does not have a personality disorder. Shannon is somewhat relieved to hear that, but she's been thinking for months that she might have this kind of mental health problem. Before she can feel at peace with this diagnosis, she wants a second opinion. So Shannon finds another doctor. This time, Shannon picks a mental health professional that has a different method than her first doctor. Let's say the first doctor was a psychotherapist. Her second doctor is a specialist in cognitive and behavioral therapy. It's not super important right now what the differences are between those methods. That's a bit in the weeds for, especially as a philosopher, to tell you all the details of those two things. But what's important, and usually I think what you know from as a client for a therapist is like you have a vague sense that this doctor is trained in this one method, but you don't often really know what those methods mean or what that really looks like unless you've had a lot of experience in the mental health field. So what's important to know is, Shannon saw that there were different methods between the doctors. So that's just capturing a bigger range of experts in the mental health field. Now, Shannon wants to make sure that these differences in training aren't part of the reason she was given her initial diagnosis. So we pick a couple that should help give us more evidence, right? Again, after some time, Shannon asked this doctor whether she has a personality disorder, and the doctor says she does not. Now, Shannon's been evaluated by two different mental health professionals at this point. Both of the experts spent years training how to identify folks with mental health problems using the DSM. Both experts agree that Shannon does not have a personality disorder. Although Shannon still thinks her behavior sometimes aligns with mental health disorder posts on the internet, She can now rest easy that folks who have dedicated their entire careers to evaluating the status of folks' mental health have officially told her she does not have that. But that is a much stronger collection of evidence, right? She worked with these people, they gave her an official diagnosis. That is so strong and so valuable compared to reading a few posts on the internet. So Shannon is more confident than ever that she is not a toxic person, but she can also recognize that her behaviors do sometimes contribute to the problems in her life, right? Just because she's not a toxic person, that doesn't mean she never is part of the problem when she faces these hardships in her life. So now that Shannon has worked with 2 different mental health professionals, she's decided to continue working with the second doctor she met. While she doesn't need to work on addressing a personality disorder, she does have some emotional work to do. She believes she can benefit from working with this kind of expert. Over time, Shannon begins to make progress on some of the tension that she is carrying in her personal life. Shannon does eventually find ways to create close relationships within her life, right? So she didn't need the support of mental health professionals in the way somebody with a personality disorder needs that kind of support. But like most people, Shannon still benefited from working with these kind of folks. And that eventually led to her being in a better space in the areas in her life that she felt were inadequate. Okay, so let's step back a little. We've heard the story of Shannon. Now, Shannon, like many of us, see ourselves in some descriptions of toxic people on the internet, right? It's pretty common to, when you get a list on an Instagram post, toxic people are like this, and it's just got this big list of things. It's pretty common for most people to see themselves in that list to some degree, right? Remember back in the day, we talked about how while not everyone is a toxic person, everyone at some point in their lives is going to engage in toxic behavior. That's why those lists can be kind of tricky. Shannon began her journey by developing some useful self-care behaviors that can contribute to good mental health, but those efforts were not enough to help her with her concerns about toxicity. It's good to meditate. It's good to journal. It's good to find time for joy in your life. All of that's really valuable. All that can really help your mental health. But at the end of the day, those things are not going to tell you whether you are a toxic person or not. People with personality disorders can also engage in all of those behaviors, right? That's the common recommendations on the internet are often they're not quite meeting up to the level of the question of, am I a toxic person? So Shannon had some evidence that she was a toxic person, but she chose not to self-diagnose. She chose to turn to mental health professionals. Since these folks have dedicated their careers to understanding the nuances of the DSM, they were able to confidently tell Shannon that she does not have a personality disorder. After 2 of these experts helped soothe these concerns, Shannon was able to move forward and start doing the work that more directly improved her emotional life, right? So we were noticing that Shannon could have spent a lot more time really focused on this question, am I toxic, really stressing about this question, trying to self-diagnose. Every time she thought about it, she'd be like, well, I think I have this, but I don't really know. Rather than spend all of that time and energy stressing out and focusing on that part of her, question about her own mental health, she went and got the answer in a reasonable way. And she was able to move on and focus on things that were actually going to help her instead of focusing on this big picture question that she just didn't have the ability to answer. You can't answer the question, am I the toxic one, completely by yourself. You can't do it. You need the support of somebody who's trained in looking at mental health problems in order to determine that. And Shannon recognized that, and she just went through and she took care of business, and she was able to start working on the things that mattered. Now, it's so tempting to self-diagnose. I mean, especially if you're like like in your everyday life, you're like pretty good at figuring stuff out on your own. Like if you're the kind of person that can like go on the internet and figure out how to fix the sink in the bathroom, and you just can just like do it, right? It can be really tempting to be like, no, like I'm self-sufficient, I can do this. And the DSM it looks deceptively simple, right? It looks like, oh, we could just like approach this no problem, but it's not the best path, right? Fixing your sink, sure, right? There's a bunch of mechanical pieces, like we can handle that. That's not, human psychology is not that simple. And I can say that confidently. I work in philosophy of mind. So I'm very confident the human mind is not that simple. So we need to be careful when we look at things that seem simple describing the human experience. So for a lot of us, the only way we can really find peace with the question of our own toxicity is to consult with mental health professionals. By consulting more than one expert, we can feel confident that we either do or do not meet the specific criteria for any given mental health disorder. We're not just catching the differences, between the training of these two doctors, anything like that. Ultimately, this process helped Shannon access resources that really did lead to improving her life, right? She got to the point where she could improve. She didn't get bogged down in this question. Now, if you want to think more about Shannon, right? If you like to reflect more on Shannon's process and the good things that happened to her by actually just solving this problem once and for all, you can find discussions of every part of this presentation, including Shannon, with some exclusives over on our podcast. Our podcast episodes are broken into like 10 to 20 minute mini episodes. So you can listen to them while you're in your car, while you're cleaning, while you're going about your daily life. They're nice little chunks. And you can find the link to that podcast in the description box below. All right, we finally got to the part where there's going to be concrete things you can do right now to help figure out what you are going to do to determine once and for all if you're the toxic one. So first thing we got to do is figure out how badly do you need to know, right? Like what's your level of motivation here? Like, are you just kind of casually considering this question? Are you really ready to just like have the answer? We got to figure that out. So to determine once and for all if you are the toxic one requires seeking help from mental health professionals. That's an investment both of time and most likely at least some money. How much money is going to depend on where you live, your health insurance status, the quality of the health insurance that you have. But it's definitely going to take time. It's likely to cost some money. Now, in order to know if that kind of investment is justified right now, if that's the thing you really want to do, we need to take a look at how badly you really want to know the answer to this question. If you want to know it really badly, then it might make sense to invest that time and money. If you are kind of neutral on it, it might not make sense. So first thing to get us started is I want you to do a little bit of a free write. Now, as I've said before, this doesn't have to be writing if writing's not your thing. You can record yourself on your phone. You can do this a bunch of different ways, but I really want you to spend some time thinking through these different questions. Let me drink some water because it's still quite dry here. Also, I have a cozy on my water bottle that is not functional. This is not doing anything. I just bought it, or I bought it on Etsy and it just came and I wanted to look at it. So it's pointlessly on the water bottle. Okay, so in your free write, here are the things that you should try to answer. And just do stream of consciousness in this, right? Don't think really hard about it at this point. So how different would your life be if you had an answer to this question right now? Would it make a really big difference? Would it be a small difference? How different would it be? How much peace would knowing the answer bring me, right? Would this really help me feel more calm? Would this really make a difference in my stress levels? Will knowing the answer to the question really help you make informed decisions in the future? Do you want to be able to make those kind of informed decisions? Do you think knowing that this answer would help your friends and family better understand you? That's a particularly important one if you're feeling kind of disconnected from the people in your life. Do you think that this information would somehow help resolve that challenging interpersonal issue? Are you really prepared to hear the final answer? You know, some people ask this question, and one of the reasons they don't seek the actual experts that would help them answer the question is because they aren't really ready for the answer. So if you're gonna put in the time and effort, you need to be prepared to hear the final answer. So is that where you are? Are you prepared right now to hear that answer? How much effort are you willing to dedicate to finding the answer? It might take some work to get to find those mental health professionals. So are you willing, are you able right now? How much effort can you dedicate to figuring that out? And then similarly, how much time and money are you willing to spend to find the answer? Can you afford that time? Can you afford that money right now? Maybe at what point will you be able to afford those things? Okay, so that's just like a list of questions. You can answer all of them. You can pick ones that speak to you. Just go ahead and free write it out and get some of your thoughts down on paper for these questions. Once you've been through all of those smaller questions, I want you to step back and I want you to kind of synthesize. So I want you to answer this one big picture question. You're probably going to draw on some of the information from the smaller questions that we just went through. And I want you to try to answer, you could do this in like a paragraph or so. Am I ready to settle once and for all if I am a toxic person? Now, it's totally okay if you're not ready. Don't feel like you have to say yes, right? It's kind of a scary thing to really learn more about your own mental health. And it can feel intimidating to have to go through these things. So it's okay if you're not ready, but it's bad to start this process or spend all this energy wondering about the question if you're not ready. So try to answer this question for yourself, 5 sentences or so. Am I ready to settle this? Okay, so once you have your answer, it's probably going to be in the form yes or no, right? So if you're ready, if the answer was yes, I am ready to do this, let's bust out your calendar and schedule in the time needed to do the stuff to get this done, right? This isn't just a theoretical exercise. I want you to actually start making progress. If this question is really important to you, let's get you those answers. So you're going to need some time to figure out this stuff. So you don't have to actually complete these tasks right now, but I want you to get your calendar out, your planner, whatever you're using, and block off some time so that you can focus on doing a couple tasks. You're going to need to identify at least 2 mental health professionals you would like to work with. You might have to take considerations of insurance into account. Not all mental health professionals accept insurance. This can be a little bit complicated to navigate. If you do have insurance in the United States, especially, I would recommend starting with your insurance's website. They should have some tools so you can look up people like psychologists and psychiatrists. You're also going to need time to call their offices and schedule the appointments. Not all mental health professionals are accepting new patients at all times. So you might have to call a couple different people. So block off some time to let yourself do that. You also need to block off some time to create a budget so that you have the funds you need when the appointment time comes. Usually the way these services work in the United States is you go and you see the provider, you have your meeting with them, and then at the end of that, you need to either pay for it in full or do a copay with your insurance, or pay some and then you can pay over time in installments. So you don't want to take on and answer this question if it's going to cause serious harm in terms of your financial things. So you want to look hard at like how you're going to make choices throughout the month, how you're going to navigate things so that you have the funds you need in order to receive these services. So if you're not ready, right? You're thinking, okay, this question seemed really important to me, but like, I'm not really ready to do all this stuff. It's just not for me. Totally fine. That's okay. I still want you to bust out your calendar, and I want you to schedule in some time. You have some different tasks I want you to do, but I want you to spend a couple chunks of time reflecting on why did this question seem so important to you at first? What was really causing you to like watch this video? Right? What was really getting you to think like, oh, am I the toxic one? You've gotten this far. It seemed like this was important to you, but now that we're looking at how to actually answer it, you're not so confident. So I just want you to think about, why did that happen? What was causing all of that? Then I want you to spend some time identifying concrete things you can do to address some of the reasons you were worried about this question, right? You've decided you're not going to answer it through the mental health thing. That's fine. But what are you going to do to help relax some of the reasons you were worried about this, right? It's not good to carry all that worry and tension with you. So maybe it's meditation, maybe it's some of those popular solutions, and that's going to help you relax about it. Whatever you need, I want you to spend some time identifying those things that you can start implementing in your life. And then finally, I want you to have some time to like actually make a plan for completing those concrete things, right? So maybe, the plan is every day after work, I'm going to spend 10 minutes and I'm just going to read this book that I enjoy, or like whatever the thing is. I want you to make it really concrete. These are the things I'm going to do, and this is when I'm going to do it. And I want you to start implementing that, because clearly this question seemed important. You deserve some support. If you're not going to get the answer once and for all, you need to start letting go of the fact you're not going to know the answer. And you need to start finding other ways to kind of soothe some of the things that were creating tension around this question. Okay, so that was the first action item. Let's move to the second. I want you to make the case for yourself. Now, remember, I'm gonna give you this activity, but I want you to know that only a mental health professional can officially diagnose someone with a personality disorder. You can't figure it out yourself. That's not recommended. Even experts don't do that. But we can still try to explore how we're thinking about this issue, right? As a philosopher, that's one of the most important things I help people do, is to figure out how to think through really complicated questions. Do I have a personality disorder is a pretty complicated question. That's a serious question. We're going to have to sort some things out to do that. So I'm going to help you do that some here. But this is not a diagnostic tool. This will not produce an answer. This will basically help you understand why you're thinking these things. And it might give you some structures for the future conversation you do have with a mental health provider. So we're going to lay out the reasons you believe you may have a personality disorder. This is going to have two major benefits for you. First, you'll be able to explain to the mental health professional you may eventually work with more about your thinking on the topic. This can help in your conversations with a mental health provider because you've already kind of organized your thinking a little bit. Second, you're going to get all of those different worries you've had floating around your head out on paper, and you won't need to keep revisiting them for fear of forgetting them, right? There's this idea that if it's the same reason that like a brain dump works, right? You put it all on the piece of paper and then your brain is no longer responsible for holding on to every little piece of information, and it can kind of relax a little bit. So this exercise should help you do that. So the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, what do you think it means to be a toxic person? You can just kind of brain dump all of the things that you think make someone a toxic person. If you want to, you can use the formal tools of the DSM if that informs your thinking, or you can use some of the ideas you've gathered from your time on the internet, or you might just pull on your own personal experience working with folks you thought were toxic. Whatever sources you pull on, just try to write down everything you think makes a toxic person toxic. Now, I've said I think a toxic person is somebody who has a personality disorder, but you might disagree with me, right? It's not like that's written in the skies. It's not the word of God or something like that. That just is the way I think through what toxic people are. You might decide you have a different view on what toxic people are. So this can kind of help you figure that out. That might inform your conversation with whatever mental health provider you eventually have. Now, once you have that brain dump, these are all the characteristics you think a toxic person has. I want you to go through each item and ask yourself if you participate in that problematic behavior. How do you compare? How do your actions compare to all of the things you think a toxic person does? Now, as you're doing this, I want you to try to be as specific as you can. Give specific examples of situations where you acted like a toxic person. So you might say on your list, like, okay, put a check mark. That means like, yes, I do that. Here's an example. And like describe that event. The more specific you are, the more you can have an informative conversation with a mental health professional, right? You might think like, okay, a toxic person screams at people inappropriately. And then you give an example of when you like screamed at, a cashier at a grocery store because they didn't have exact change. And that example might seem really obvious to you, like that was a time I inappropriately screamed at someone. But working with a mental health professional, you might unpack that like, okay, there were actually some other reasons in that situation I was acting that way and it wasn't good, but it's not the same as at random screaming inappropriately at people or something like that. So the more specific you are, the more you'll have concrete cases to kind of look over when you're working with somebody who's an expert in the nature of human behavior. Okay, so you've done your brain dump. You've paired each item, or as many as you could, with examples of your own behavior. Now I want you to step back again. I want you to step back. Go ahead and write a paragraph answering the question, again, am I the toxic one? Include whether you believe that you are or are not a toxic person, so a yes or a no. And then include at least 3 reasons that you think you are a toxic person. You've just created a list of like a whole bunch of reasons, but I want you to pick the 3 strongest reasons, the 3 things that you think make it clearest that you are a toxic person. I want you to write those out. So what we've done here is we went from kind of a brain dump stage. We did this in 2 different scenarios. In one scenario, in the first action item, we were focused on coming up with a plan, taking concrete steps. In the second action item, we're really trying to get you to organize your thinking around the question, am I the toxic one? Now, in both cases, we kind of went from this big old list, this big giant thing, and then we pared it down, we synthesized it, and we wrote this little summary that kind of solidifies what we were thinking. Okay, this is a very classic thing to do in philosophy, actually. I know we're talking about mental health issues a lot in this, but the action items here are really grounded in classic philosophic practice, where we take a whole bunch of data, we write out all of our ideas, we step back, we look at them, we try to think, okay, which of these are the strongest? Okay, based on those strongest ones, what do I think my answer to this question is? Very classic, very philosophic, and it can really help you when you're facing this question of, am I the toxic one? Now, remember this, especially the second action item, this is not a diagnostic tool. Remember, only a mental health professional. I know I need to keep saying that, but I don't want to be misleading to you guys. Just because you get to the end, you get your summary paragraph and you're like, yes, I'm a toxic person for this reason, and this reason. That doesn't mean you're a toxic person necessarily. That is you exploring your own thinking, exploring why you have this belief. That doesn't mean that is the answer, right? You need to consult a mental health professional if you want the answer. There are good reasons we should not rely on self-diagnosis when it comes to these kind of things. It's very beneficial to have a third person perspective. You really do need the perspective of an expert. I know I'm hitting really hard on this and maybe you guys are getting bored, but I really do want to make it clear that I'm not recommending that you sort this question out completely on your own. This exercise is specifically designed to help give you some structure to your own thinking about this question. You can use this information to help guide a conversation you may have with your own mental health professional in the future. If you decide not to seek the support of mental health professionals, at the very least, you have a better understanding of why you think the things that you do believe. This is just in general, some things I want you to remember. I say this every time whenever we go through the action items. It's normal for human beings to occasionally engage in toxic behaviors. Do not be freaked out that in this analysis you notice that you do some toxic behaviors. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a toxic person. These action items are designed for you to learn how to reflect on your own experiences, give you some structure to your thinking. As you're doing all of this stuff, I want you to be mindful of your own mental health and emotional needs as you complete these items, right? Don't go into like just ignoring everything. If your body is telling you like you're uncomfortable or you need to take a break, please listen. Please take care of yourself as you do this. Okay, so our question today was, what can you do to determine once and for all if you are the toxic one? So here's the answer we've come up with. Since being a toxic person is being a person with a serious mental health problem, you need to consult a mental health professional. In order to know confidently whether any particular professional's diagnosis is accurate, it is best to seek the advice of at least 2 different professionals. This requires both a time and financial commitment, so it's important to feel ready to reach out to that support when you are ready. Or you need to know that you're willing, able, and can put that investment in. So in our next episode, we're going to be starting season 2. If you want to know what the topic is, head over to our Instagram page. Not only do my followers get to vote on our topic, but they also get sneak peeks as I work on creating this stuff for everyone. So check out more info on this week's topic on our blog and the podcast. Both of those are linked below. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you can keep up with all the great content we're going to have coming out for season 2. Thanks for joining, and be sure to give a thumbs up if you like this episode. I'm so glad you spent some time with me today, and I can't wait to see you in the future. Bye-bye.